Mel Gibson's Meltdown has been front-page news for more than 2 weeks. Americans know more about this meltdown than they know about Supreme Court nominee Elena Kagan's judicial philosophy, the content of the 2,500-page health care bill, the failure of the Department of Justice to prosecute the new Black Panther Party over voting intimidation, and the latest banking regulations. We Americans are often lulled into sleep by being taken off the path down a particular road that has nothing to do with what's going on in our nation. Lindsay Lohan goes to court and she's slapped with a contempt citation. She's going to end up going to jail for 90 days. She writes an expletive on one of her fingernails, pointing it at the judge. Americans know all about this, and of course, Mel Gibson and his meltdown with his, I don't know if he's married to this woman or not, but he left his wife and children and went off with a much younger woman, had a child, and then this video has come out, audio I guess has come out with him ranting and raving about her. And this has become front page news for all Americans. And while this is going on, it acts as a screen to cover up so much more that's going on in our nation that really does have an impact on us as citizens of the United States. What Mel Gibson does only affects essentially two people, this woman and their child, and that is something that needs to be dealt with, and I'm not minimizing that. But it actually has no effect on us. What Mel Gibson does in his personal life does not affect me in my property, in my family, or anyone else's. He is not parading in the streets, supporting, going mental on his girlfriend and wanting laws passed and say, hey, it's okay to do this. This is Mel Gibson on his own. This recording was done in the privacy of his own home. Some have said it was even probably illegal where it took place because he didn't know anything about it. But the effect of what Mel Gibson does doesn't affect me, and it doesn't affect you. And yet there's so much going on out there, and I mentioned of course, the health care and these new banking regulations, the failure of the Department of Justice to go after the new Black Panther Party and voting intimidation, what the NAACP has said about the Tea Party because they have political clout. And that's the point of all of this. Those who have political clout and push legislation through, we should be much more informed and much more interested in that than what happens to Mel Gibson or Lindsay Lohan. And the media, of course, should be much more interested in that as well. And I've always said, apply the Republican test. If a Republican, if this had happened during a Republican administration, especially the administration of George Bush, you know that the media would be all over this, but they have decided not to do so. And I want to put a biblical slant on this. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, there is an unnamed individual who is singled out here. It says, it is actually reported that there is immorality among you, an immorality of such a kind as does not exist even among the Gentiles, that someone has his father's wife. Now notice this. No name is mentioned. It's someone. It's been reported that there's immorality among you, and you have become arrogant. You have not mourned instead, in order that the one who had done this deed might be removed from your midst. See, Paul doesn't even mention a name. He just said, look, there's somebody in your congregation that has sinned. You need to deal with it. But that sinning doesn't affect the other congregations. There is no church policy being changed as a result of all of this in terms of, oh, now it's okay to have your, as it says, as your father's wife. So the Bible puts these types of incidents within the care of the church, within the care of the family. And of course, the larger context of this could be the civil magistrate if there is in fact violence involved here, as there might have been with Mel Gibson. That's perfectly legitimate. But there's no impact on this particular story or what happened with Mel Gibson or Lindsay Lohan that affects me or affects this particular nation. That's why much more attention should be given to public policy issues than should be the personal lifestyles of the rich and famous. And now to go back to the Old Testament and give you a couple of examples of this, you see how much time is spent on 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8 talks about a king. And while the people wanted a king like all the other nations, and Samuel is despondent over this, and God says, look, they're not rejecting you as king over them, they are rejecting me. Let these people know what this king is going to do. Be the media. Work as a journalist here. Lay out the parameters of what will happen to this nation if this goes into effect. And so Samuel gets up and he says, look, the king's going to take 10% of your income. He's going to have your sons and daughters serve him. He's going to send your children off to war. It goes on and on and on. And the people say, we still want this. But Samuel did his job as a prophet, both I think both secular and religious here, in letting the people know the effect of this political decision upon the nation. That's much more important than what took place in the Corinthian church over this particular incident of an unnamed individual. 2 Samuel chapter 12. Nathan the prophet comes up to David, and he tells the story about this rich individual, and he takes the ewe lamb and so forth, and David is outraged by all this, and of course Nathan says, you are the man, you are the problem here. Well, David's decisions had an effect upon the nation. I mean, he takes a man and sends him off to the front and has that so that he'll hopefully be killed, steals his wife, and so now we have this executive privilege here. The civil magistrate can get away with these types of things. And so here again, we have somebody who is a prophet, both religious and secular, in the sense of letting the nation know what this king has done. That's a legitimate function of the press. Then you have 2 Chronicles chapter 26, where Uzziah the king, the king infringes upon the sovereignty, the jurisdictional sovereignty of the church, going into the temple and offering incense. And the priests, who are described as valiant men, go up and oppose Uzziah the king, letting him know that he has violated the jurisdictional separation between the temple and state. And of course, why are they called valiant men? Because the king has the army behind him. He could have called his army and had these kings, these priests executed. They don't have the power of the sword to do so. And so we Americans seem to be more enamored with the stories of the rich and famous who have no effect on us. Their individual lifestyle choices don't really have that much an effect on us. It's when they use the power of the state to impose those lifestyle choices on us that is the important issue, and the issue of homosexuality and abortion. But what they do personally doesn't really affect us. What does affect us, however, is what the state does in a 2,500-page health care bill and new banking regulations and failing to prosecute those who intimidate voters. So we as Americans need to get our priorities straight and call the media to account to do their job. And the Bible is a good example of putting things in perspective for us, making the distinction of what takes place individually and within families and how to deal with those things, and then those things which happen in the state and within the church.
American Vision is proud to present this year's Worldview Super Conference, July 21st through 24th at North Metro Church, Marietta, Georgia. For more information, visit conference.americanvision.org. That's conference.americanvision.org.